Welcome to Full Circle. Thank you for joining us on Cable 14. I'm Emily Wilmson, and we're here today with our guest, Josh Burks, Economic Health Director of the City of Fort Collins. Welcome, Josh.
Thank you, Emily, for having me.
And Tom Leeson, who's a Redevelopment Manager for the Urban Renewal Authority. Welcome, Tom.
Thank you.
And the topic today really is to talk about redevelopment in the city and the URA, or Urban Renewal Authority, as we just said, and wanted to talk to you both a little bit about why we would talk about redevelopment on a sustainability TV show. Why is redevelopment a sustainable practice?
Sure. Well, it's a great question. As you know, the City of Fort Collins has established some pretty laudable goals related to growth management. As part of the city plan, they created a urban growth boundary that basically said we're not going to grow it out anymore, and we're not going to promote the negative effects of sprawl, and we really want to focus on developing the inner core, the urban core. And redevelopment is inherently that effort, trying to grow up and not out. It's a much more efficient use of the land. It promotes pedestrian and alternative modes of transportation. It's more efficient in terms of using the existing infrastructure that's in place. And so it ties in very nicely to the city's sustainable goals in terms of its triple bottom line, because it also promotes a higher concentration of economic activity in the urban core. It also promotes higher density housing. So it ties very nicely into the triple bottom line goals of the city.
Okay.
Absolutely. I guess I would just add to that it's really about utilizing a tool that the state legislature created, some time ago, really to help us grow smarter, right, and achieve the city plan objectives. I think if you go back to city plan and you look at that document, a big aspect of it was the idea of targeted infill and redevelopment, as well as really emphasizing the spine of our community. And the two urban renewal plans that we have today are both located on the spine, one in North College, basically the river, if you will, up to city limits, right where 287 starts to make the bend west, and then the Midtown area, which is basically Prospect down to the South Transit Center on Max, both of which are focused on College Avenue, or the concept of the spine that was created in city plan and really identified as the focal point, as Tom was saying, the location that we want to try to encourage that growth up and sort of change the direction of what's happening in the community.
So backing up for a second, you were talking a little bit about the state legislature creating what are essentially urban renewal authorities. What is an urban renewal authority? Let's back up a little bit and talk about how it's structured and what it does and how it fits into the city.
Well, the Urban Renewal Authority is the city's redevelopment agency. It is enacted by state statute. The state allows municipalities to create urban renewal authorities. It is really a separate governmental agency. In Fort Collins' case, our city council acts as the Urban Renewal Authority board. There are other communities that have an appointed board, very much like the Fort Collins Downtown Development Authority, where it's a completely separate entity. But in Fort Collins' case, they've decided to have the city council act as the Urban Renewal Authority, which is common as well. And it's the redevelopment agency that, as I said, is permitted or enabled by state statute, and it allows the municipality to use tax increment financing, which is the predominant or the principal financing mechanism for redevelopment, for its redevelopment efforts and goals.
Okay.
And if you go back even a little bit further and you think about, well, where did the idea of urban renewal tax increment financing really come from? It came out of the Housing and Urban Development Department at the federal level, really sort of post-World War II in reaction to a lot of deteriorating infrastructure inside urban cores. Redevelopment is a uniquely urban issue, and that's part of the reason when you see state enabling legislation, like the legislation that the state of Colorado passed, it focuses on the municipality as the entity that really creates the agency, also reviews and authorizes the plan areas, and reviews and authorizes the use of tax increment financing by that agency. Again, it's intended to focus on removing the blight that often happens as urbanization ages, to allow for municipalities to deal with that particular issue. So I think it's important to remember that heritage when we think about why in Fort Collins we've created an Urban Renewal Authority, which, if memory serves, the Urban Renewal Authority was created shortly after the enabling legislation was put in place. I think it was either the 60s or early 70s. Mm-hmm. So it's not a new entity in Fort Collins. However, we did not have a plan area until North College was created in 2004, effective really in January 1st of 2005.
So we officially have 2 plan areas, 3 plan areas?
We have 2 plan areas. We have the North College plan area, which was established in 2004, yep. And then the Midtown Urban Renewal Plan area, which extends from essentially Prospect down to a little bit south of Harmony. And within the Prospect South, within the Midtown, there are 2 tax increment financing districts, the Prospect South District as well as the Foothills Mall District.
Okay.
And it's important to distinguish that in the difference between a plan area, the agency itself, and a district. Mm-hmm. So the Urban Renewal Authority, what we've been calling the agency today, its physical boundary is the same as the city limits. So the Urban Renewal Authority is authorized for the entire extent of the city. But then there's a process that has to be gone through to determine that there are blight factors in existence and create a plan. And the plan really is designed to remediate that blight. That's mm-hmm. the primary purpose. It has the spillover effect of encouraging redevelopment and economic activity, many other public benefits that Tom talked about earlier when we were talking about sustainability, pedestrian connections, affordable housing, those sorts of things. But its primary purpose is that blight remediation. So the process of creating a plan has to find the blight and then identifies that geographic area that you're going to basically remediate the blight in. And then currently within those plans, there's allowed for TIF districts to be created. And that utilizes one of the key powers of the Urban Renewal Authority, which is leveraging tax increment financing, or really the value created by a particular investment or project back into that geographic area or that project. And so we've taken 2 different approaches in the community. In North College, the TIF district is the same as the plan area. So it's the entire plan area. In Midtown, because of the size and extent of that particular plan area, we've turned TIF on as it's been needed in smaller sub-districts or smaller sub-areas of the plan. And they're the two that Tom mentioned earlier.
And so these taxing districts directly deal with property taxes in our community. Is that correct?
Predominantly, yes. Tax increment financing is predominantly a property tax. As the property tax revenue increases as a result of the redevelopment, that new revenue generated can be used to go back into the project. Sales tax increment can be used as well, although the City of Fort Collins hasn't used that as much in the past.
Okay, and that's an important distinction, by the way. You mentioned, these districts, creating these districts, these plan areas, that's really up to City Council with input from the citizens in Fort Collins, correct? That's not, when you decide to create a new plan area, that isn't something you're doing in the Economic Health Office, right? So tell us a little bit about that process. How is a plan area created? How do you, who brings it to your attention? What are the steps?
Well, the steps are outlined very clearly in the state statute. So there's a very deliberate and public process that needs to occur in terms of notification. There's a blight study that needs to occur to identify that the area, in fact, is suffering from blight conditions, insufficient infrastructure or environmental contamination. All of those contribute to the blight conditions. Public notification to the property owners, and then public hearings through the City Council. So it's a very public process.
Okay.
Yep.
And as far as the financing goes, once you get to that piece as well, that also goes through a public process, correct?
Right. I mean, the financing can happen in one of 2 ways. It can either occur at the same time that the plan area is created, as was the case in North College, or it can occur through an amendment to the plan, as we've done in the case of the Midtown project, where you wait and you turn on one of these sub-districts for tax increment financing. Again, the statute requires that there are notifications required. In fact, the statute requires that we do an impact analysis of the potential impact on the county and then provide notice to the county in a timely manner and have a chance to discuss with them what impacts might occur. So the state statute is, as Tom was saying, very much designed for it to be a public process, an open process, and requires, I think, a pretty high level of minimum notification. I think it's our desire here in Fort Collins for us to go above and beyond, and that's something that we're continuing to revisit every time we look at a plan area or a tax increment district. How can we improve the dialogue that we're having with the community?
And thanks, Josh, for that. I know one of the big projects that the community has lots of questions about right now is the Foothills Mall. Mm-hmm. What's happening with that project? Where are we? What's when can we see construction maybe start? What can you tell us about that project?
Well, it's progressing. As the community is aware, that the City Council approved a redevelopment agreement back in May, and that agreement hasn't yet been executed. But the city and the Alberta Development continues their negotiations. In fact, they've made some changes to their plans that are going to require some additional public hearings before Planning Commission, and then another review of the redevelopment agreement. And we fully expect that the project will commence. Construction will commence soon thereafter, probably right in the beginning of the year. So we're encouraged by that, and we are optimistic that it will continue.
And many in the community have asked me, why has this taken longer than, and why didn't we see immediate action after May 7th? And when I respond to citizens, what I like to help people realize is that redevelopment of any kind, development of any kind, just the real estate process is complicated. And so when we compare the timeline we're on to other timelines that major mall redevelopments that have been undertaken elsewhere in the state followed, we're still ahead of most of the other projects. Mm-hmm. These are complicated projects, and as such, they do take a lot of time. The project itself has to lock down several different aspects. To me, it's not unlike putting a tire on a car. Mm-hmm. You don't just immediately lock down the nut. You have to get it to a certain level of tightness and then work your way around, eventually having everything tightened down. It's not unlike that in this project, where the public financing package is one of the nuts, the construction financing package is another nut, the tenants is another nut, construction costs. So there's a lot of different moving pieces, and part of that process of working your way around from nut to make sure that the tire is fully well seated and balanced, when we're done. So it's complicated, and that's partly why it takes time. The good news is it continues to be, I think, a great project with the opportunity to attract a lot of tenants that will provide new shopping opportunities for the community, as well as create a new focal point in Midtown, which is, I think, something when you talk to the public, they've been asking for some time. People love Old Town, and Old Town is going to continue to remain and I think be unaltered by the presence of the mall as a focal point for our community and for the broader region. But there are some types of activities, primarily, the kind of true shopping experience in terms of clothing and apparel that people are wanting in our community that we don't right now have, given the mall has declined, and that's an opportunity to provide that destination again for our residents.
And that's an interesting point. You often get questions about tenants, the tenant mix in the mall. Talk a little bit about why that isn't up to us. Although I would love to pick a few stores myself, but why?
I have an ongoing list. It seems like anytime someone, a female usually, finds out that I'm working on this particular project, the first thing they do is rattle off their list of desired tenants. Uh-huh. Tenants is really the domain of the developer. Mm-hmm. Honestly, the type of tenant they attract is really how they make their money, through the rent in a particular project. And so because of that, they are as motivated as we are to find those tenants that will speak to consumers the best in our community, as well as those that aren't currently here that would have an interest in being in Fort Collins, and making sure that they're the best tenants possible. because they're the ones that then can sustain, the kind of rent that gives the developer the income, which is motivating them to do the project. So it's really up to them to negotiate that. And I think everyone can appreciate that negotiation is a process that takes time and that requires both parties be fully engaged, and so needs to be done not in the public domain until such time as both parties have come to some kind of agreement. And so that's why it's really up to the developer as they do secure their commitments from tenants to really share with us who those are. But they're chasing the same kinds of things that I think you and I would like to see in this community because it's currently absent.
Right. Okay, great. So another interesting aspect of this project is an underpass that would tie the mall, or at least pedestrians in particular, from the MAX project to the mall. Talk about why it's important for public transportation and the MAX project to be such an important part of not only this project, but the URA projects in general.
Right. Well, one of the purposes of the URA and tax increment financing is to be able to invest in a project and bring it up to current standards. And that's inherently why redevelopment is more expensive. And the mall is an example of that. One of the goals of Midtown is to increase pedestrian activity and pedestrian connections, both up and down Mason Corridor and across College Avenue, which is always a challenge. So as part of this project, we're looking at, as the Larimer number 2 ditch kind of, as we know, flows across College Avenue and comes into the property currently. So that ditch will be relocated to the west side of College Avenue. And we're fortunate to be able to utilize the bridge structure that the ditch goes under now, and be able to convert that into a pedestrian underpass. So the goal is to be able to have a pedestrian connection that comes from McClelland along the current route of the ditch and then go underneath College Avenue and connect right into the mall property, which is a bonus for the community in terms of a very strong pedestrian connection both to and from the mall right directly to the Mason Corridor. And that's an important element, both the pedestrian connection underneath as well as bringing the mall site up to current standards with sidewalks along College Avenue, nice wide sidewalks with right up against the shops that are going to be pushed up against College Avenue. So that's the goal of that.
And it, if you will, brings the conversation almost full circle back to the topic we began with, which was sustainability and how it figures into urban renewal. And making additional pedestrian connections allows for those alternative modes that we talked about being a part of making our community much more sustainable. I think it also really, underscores that the primary purpose of urban renewal, redevelopment, and the Urban Renewal Authority is really about placemaking or that growth management that we talked about. The deal making is a side show, if you will, to the ultimate goal, which is enhancing our community, delivering on our community's goals and objectives, sustainability being a huge one, the pedestrian connections in this case being a big aspect of that.
So as part of that then, when we're talking about URA projects and public transportation, MAX is really designed to spur some new development along there that might be higher density, right? That might bring more people. Can you talk a little bit about the interconnection then of that sort of development and that, the public, what is it called? Bus rapid transit project.
It's, again, it's connected to our overall community goals of infill and redevelopment, focusing on the urban core. And in order to do that, you need a very efficient transportation system that allows for multiple modes of transportation. So it's increasing those options for transportation that's so important, rather than having an auto-centric community, which is what sprawl tends to be. So this is the MAX, the Urban Renewal Authority, the redevelopment of the mall are all efforts in that long-term objective of creating a very efficient and higher density community. And so, yes, the hope is that the MAX will create and result in some higher density development The land use code now calls for mixed use development along the corridor. And so it provides the option. It's not saying that nobody will have cars anymore, but it does provide those alternative modes and those options for to get around the community and just be more efficient.
And when we have studied the corridor in the past, I mean, we've done several studies, the most recent one being the Midtown Plan, which set, sort of the stage for implementation of the spine and kind of intensification and growing up process. But in the past, when we've studied the corridor, part of what we've looked at is what are the development opportunities as well as the market pressures that would deliver on this concept. Some people might ask, well, it's one thing to say we want to encourage higher density and we allow for it in a regulatory environment, but will the market deliver it? Will it be something that's desired? And those past studies have absolutely shown that that's the case. I think anybody who's following the real estate market now is very much aware of the fact that we have one of the lowest apartment vacancy rates, I think in our community's history as well as in the state. And that's being driven by a variety of things, not the least of which is CSU's commitment to continuing to try to grow its student body, as well as, coming out of the recent global recession. Home ownership has fallen back to more normal levels, which means there is a higher renter population in our community than there was, say, a decade ago. That all applies pressure to housing in a rental form, which is usually developed in a more higher density way. Plus, if you look at where people's preferences are moving, there have been a lot of national studies by like the Urban Land Institute and other entities that follow real estate trends. And they are seeing desire both by older households, the empty nesters and the baby boom generation, to live in a higher density environment and a more multifamily environment, but also by younger generations as well that want to have that more social environment as part of their living arrangement, not just their online presence as well. So both are creating an opportunity where this type of housing is being driven by the market. And so coupling that with the market demand for that kind of housing with the regulatory environment we've created with the Transit Overlay Development District in the Midtown area, and then adding to it the redevelopment tool, it really is a comprehensive approach to then delivering, ultimately what is the objective of, I think anything this city does, which is trying to encourage this place as a great place through redevelopment.
And I will add that that focusing your efforts on infill and redevelopment has its challenges, and it's inherently more expensive because of the existing constraints that you have to deal with in the urban core. As I indicated before, there's environmental contamination, there's insufficient infrastructure. So while we have this goal of growing up and not out, that's where the Urban Renewal Authority can come in, because in order to attract that private investment, and the demand may be there, but if the costs don't work, then the private sector just won't invest within the urban core, and that's where the Urban Renewal Authority can come in and provide some of that assistance, financial assistance, to close that gap and make that development a reality.
Right.
Okay, great. So we're probably running out of time. Any last thoughts from both of you about what's happening with the URA and tax increment financing and what the city's goals are? Tom, any last thoughts?
Well, no, I appreciate the opportunity to share with the community our goals and objectives. I think the Urban Renewal Authority is a important tool for the community and really provides, it's one tool to help the community achieve its long-term objectives related to infill and redevelopment, and I think it's an important one. So.
Right, and I guess I'll just add, it's kind of what we've said earlier. It really is using that tool to deliver on city objectives, which is about placemaking. And so it's not really about the deal making, which often gets emphasized in, I think, the paper and in the community.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Tom Leeson, our redevelopment manager in the URA, and Josh Burks, our economic health director. Thanks for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Emily.
Thank you for listening in, and we look forward to talking with you next time on Full Circle about the triple bottom line.